will you put your hands together? In fact, she's flown all the way from New York to be with us this morning. So an extra loud round of applause, please, for Lexi Mills.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a little jet lagged. It makes me feel a bit woozy. So if I start to do this, I'll run up. I wanted to talk to you about why I think seasoned professionals are so important to the future. You see, I didn't really like technology that much, but I was dyslexic, horribly as a child. I couldn't tell the difference between numbers and letters. So my dad gave me a computer, and so I could code before I could write my own name. And then I didn't have the identity of being at a disadvantage. I was at an advantage. But that didn't mean that I didn't want people skills. I didn't want to be around people. It didn't mean that I was your stereotypical super geek, if you will. So my relationship with technology was from a very, very young age about it repositioning not just your skill base, but how you feel about yourself and your identity in the world. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the current opportunities and challenges, how you can grasp what the future has to offer, and how do we close this gap between these two very different types of people who have so much to offer each other. I think technology is kind of interesting because I've always perceived technology a lot like medicine. If you go to the doctor and you go get yourself a prescription, but you don't take it, it doesn't work. Technology is the same. It can do wonderful things in our businesses, but actually some of the greatest challenges are getting people to use it. Now, my job used to be getting coverage like this for businesses like this. Then it became SEO. I got coverage and SEO. The largest growth sector in our business now is people saying, you know all those tactics you use to help people get customers? Can you use those to help us get our team to use the technology we spent a lot of money on? Isn't that bizarre? Our internal communications, the people we pay, we have to spend as much money on communicating with as we do our getting new clients. It's utterly bizarre. But this is because the relationship between human and technology doesn't quite touch yet. We say this will solve a problem, but we don't actually think about how close is it to us. It always reminds me of the cookie jar issue. When I first started working for myself, I used to have my cookies on my desk, and then you munch your cookies while you're sitting there at your laptop all day, and then it gets filled with cookie crumbs, and then you have to shake it all out. And so I started putting the cookie jar further away, just in the kitchen, on the top shelf, and I'd have to climb onto the counter to get it down. And suddenly I stopped filling my laptop with cookies. And this works both ways. And that's what we need to do. We need to work out how we bring the technology cookie jar closer, so it's just easier for everyone to use. But our attention spans are really weak. Anyone here watch Finding Nemo? Yeah. Nemo beats all young people for attention span. We got a real problem. And it's because we're all drowning in emails. I did a little bit of email math the other day. So I was, the stats don't seem to be there. There we go. So in a few years, we'll go from getting 200 emails a day, assuming they're taking around 5 minutes to respond, read, delete an email. We're going to end up spending 16 hours a day just doing email. Now, I'm an entrepreneur, so I work 16 hours a day anyway, but employees do not. This is a huge problem. Email is no longer a sufficient means of communicating internally or even externally a lot of the time if you're trying to make change. And so we've had this explosion in all sorts of different things. For example, I'm just going to flick through Boomerang. Anyone use Boomerang? It's a little app that goes onto your screen, and you just click send it back to me in 2 days. So if I have all my invoices, when I send them, I put a note on it and I say I boomerang it for the date the invoice is due. And it just tells me that I have to remember something. I don't have to write it down. So it's a quick way of filing an email. Boomerang I found helpful, but Slack is an interesting one because Slack is just social channels, and younger people get a dopamine hit from the speed of communication. Every time you get a text message, Tinder alert, you're like, ooh, give me some more. And Slack kind of leverages that aspect. But one of the most interesting things with Slack is that you'll see productivity and internal communications go up, and typically over time you see a massive drop-off. It goes full circle. It stops working. It actually causes more problems than it fixes. But it works for a time. And one of the things that a lot of businesses don't do is remove the technology once they put it in. And this is something we need to start looking at. Rescue Time is another app. Anyone here familiar with Rescue Time? A couple of you. I put Rescue Time in place for a few of my newest, youngest staff. And this was because they thought they were working really hard, and I didn't think they were. And it wasn't that they were lying. They were at their laptops all day, but they just didn't realize how much time they were burning on Facebook and all these other places. And just by putting Rescue Time on their computer, it gives you some graphs like this. It tells you where you're spending all your time. I didn't have to say anything to them. I didn't have to turn around to them and say, stop being so millennial. Get off your phone. Focus on log into your email and log out of Facebook. I didn't have to do that. I gave them awareness. But I could have taken a very different approach. I could have gotten angry. I could have said to them, why are you taking my money and not doing work? But what they lacked was self-awareness. In this digital overload, we struggle to understand where our time and where our thoughts go. And this is one of the biggest challenges between the two generation gaps that I see at the moment, is that elder generations think young people are lazy, young people are thinking that they're working really hard and don't know where all their time is going. And actually, nobody is trying to be dishonest to each other at all. But it's about awareness on both sides. Internally, we also use something called Toggle. Anyone else played with Toggle? It's basically a stopwatch. You type in what you're doing, you press start, you press stop when you're done. Toggle is really interesting from our side because it allows us to bill, but it does something even better. Instead of just exporting the hours and saying, right, that's the invoice for that client, I look at them. And I have a remote team all over the world. So I'm not sat side by side. And I'll look and I'll be like, why did that person spend 10 hours on that? And it's a piece of information to tell me they need help. They need support. And I've been blown away by the different areas that my team have actually needed support. Bear with me. One of the things that really took me back was their fear. Their fear of picking up the phone. I mean, it's a telephone. It's not a snake. But they're frightened. They're so used to monitoring everything they do in such a minute way that they don't make a mistake. Because in bygone years, if you're walking down the street and you drop some trash, just the people around you would have seen it, right? And then you carry on walking, and your legacy isn't imprinted anywhere. In the modern world, everything we do leaves a digital footprint, a legacy. And in some cases, I've actually seen younger people not just managing their own social profiles, but that of their siblings, because their online identities are perceived to be that important to them. And this is a real issue, because it means that they're frightened to do anything. They don't want to leave litter of mistakes behind them. How many of us got anywhere in life without making a couple of mistakes along the way? And this is a two-way street. Because I also see older generations not embracing technologies because they feel like they don't know the etiquettes around it. The internet is great. You get direct feedback. It's filled with trolls. If you screw it up, you'll find out really quickly, and most things are fixable. We all suffer from this fear of making a mistake. It's two-way, but slightly different scenarios. And this feedback loop needs to be broken. But there are risks. Not everything can be eradicated. A lot of my job is when someone's done something stupid, like it's not important, they say something stupid and we have to balance it out. Glassdoor is an American site. Has anyone been on here? Yeah. Glassdoor is basically where all disgruntled employees go. And they write a nice, horrible review. You are 70% more likely to write an adverse review than a positive review. That is why the internet is not a true reflection of society. And we need to be careful, because if you're trying to hire, you can look on there and you will see that all your past employees, if they're disgruntled, you're not going to get new employees. Because younger people are also very conscious to check out who they're going to be around. So they'll know about the leadership. They'll know about whether you've had a lot of chopping and changing. There are even, it was a horrible scenario, but a friend of mine, an employee accused him of sexual assault, and it ended up on Glassdoor. He didn't do it. We got it taken down. But there's an app called Way Back When Machine, and it allows you to see parts of the internet that have been deleted. And this keeps resurfacing because this girl is unhappy. So we do, although I'm saying be brave, go out there, we also need to be cautious about how we go out there and what areas we need to keep monitoring. Remember when clouds meant this? And spam? It was something we ate. My favorite cookies? There's a lot of language that surrounds the different generations in technology. And it's not that hard to get a grasp on, but it can be very intimidating. According to the Global Language Monitor, there are about 5,500 new words being entered every year. Only 1,000 words actually end up in the dictionary, but there are 5,500 new words associated with tech and business. You are never going to know every single one at all. You just need to be able to ask the right questions. And the important thing I want to challenge you on is how much language do you actually need to know to be effective? And to illustrate this, I'm going to go way back to the beginning of my career. I work in marketing, and at the very beginning, I was considered a PR, SEO, and a social media specialist. These areas are now so in-depth that I don't know all the jargon that goes into them. For example, I now have someone who designs the content strategy for Facebook, someone who actually posts it, someone who designs the images, and I have separate ad specialists to run it. They are all individuals. I have to be able to ask them questions. What does that word mean? What do you mean by that? And it takes some bravery. But there are no stupid questions. There really aren't when it comes to technology. The greatest challenge is that most people, young and old, are not asking them. And this is where most projects fail. Coco. Anyone familiar with Coco? Coco is one of my favorite stories about language. They taught Coco English. And one of the most beautiful parts of it was that Coco got taught what a bracelet was. Coco got taught what a finger was. And then they showed Coco a ring. And what did Coco say? Finger bracelet. If I had said finger bracelet to you, how many of you would have associated it with something similar to a ring? Probably fairly close, right? We don't need to know that much language in order to be effective. You can put together the pre-existing concepts and layer on the new language with questions. It doesn't have to be that hard. It's the fundamentals of business haven't changed. It's the layers on top. And if you get the layers on top right, you can do what the Associated Press did. The Associated Press feed a lot of the American news outlets. And they did something really interesting. They took the process by which journalists make and write business and finance news stories, and they automated it using AI. What we're seeing here, this grey line, that's the profit margins from using AI to automate what was a manual process. The people managing this are not young whiz kids. They are senior, very intelligent editors who are saying, is this meeting the same journalistic standards? What have we missed in the process that we've automated? The youngsters aren't able to see and do that in the same way. So they have young people coding, building, and refining the algorithm. That makes sense. But it's mature people with wisdom and experience that are creating graphs that don't go from one corner to the other, which is what I was always taught was good business. They're creating the graphs that go from bottom to top. And we can't do it without people who have wisdom of history repeating itself. Because all types of events come time and time again. And one of the things that struck me recently as I was thinking about the 2008 crash, I completely freaked out. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to have a house, I'm never going to have a future, the NHS is going to crash, and then I won't have medicine, and I'll be living in a cave, and there won't be any medicine. That was my biggest concern. My dad, he's like, I've seen this before. Markets recover, money gets made. Wisdom allows you to not panic. The human brain is not capable of being rational or logical in a heightened state of emotion, which basically means we can't solve problems unless we're calm. And it takes wisdom to be calm in frightening circumstances. Now we've created this brand new world of data, flooding us every day. Behind me you can see how many Google searches happen. Every single Google search is a data point. In fact, there are about 2.5 billion gigabytes of data being made every day. About 4 billion people around the world using the internet, and over 250 million came online in just the last year. And there's a lot of language and challenges around all these data points, because there's no point in having data if you don't know how to use it. But you know what the most beautiful data point is? One of the top things searched for year in, year out is what is love, or searches associated with love. It means that the people connecting to the internet, that's one of the things they care most about. Managing people is about managing what it means to be human. The data points online are not a true reflection of our humanity, but managing people who spend a lot of time still need online still have the same fundamental needs. They need human skills to teach them how to care. They need people to guide them forwards. And they need people to say to them, hey, these are, behind me you're seeing the top 100 search results, and when we look at it, we see a couple of practical things. You know, there's Google Translate, Fox News, calculators, because no one does mental arithmetic anymore, maps. But we also see loads of social media. Social media is where people are spending all their time. And that's quite destructive because it's not always giving you an accurate perspective on the world. A good example of this is when we look at the search volume and online activity for Star Wars. It's pretty big. How important do you think Star Wars is on a scale of 1 to 10? Are we saying 7? Is that reasonable? When we've got like World Crisis on one side, new film on the other? How important do you think it is in comparison to the Cecile the Lion situation? Or the Iran nuclear deal? If you look at the data points on the internet, this is the interest by size. People are caring more and more about trivialities because they're looking to escape the things that are frightening them, the things that wise people can help us out with. This was a PR story I did. I worked out that people don't know how to spell bathroom suites. They spell it S-W-E-E-T-S, right? So I thought, I'm going to do loads of research into literacy issues in Britain, make a chocolate bathroom to promote the fact that people can't spell sweets, and then my bathroom client will get loads of press coverage and sell loads of bathrooms. Do you know what happened? Everyone covered the fact that it was a chocolate bathroom. We're becoming more trivial. There was a real story about literacy there. My heart broke, and I got all these awards, and I refused to go and pick them up because I was just heartbroken. It's like, what? We care more about chocolate than literacy? We care more about Star Wars than nuclear deals? This is a problem. These are the search volumes, by the way. This is how much more. Blue line. That, give a shit about literacy. Top line, really like chocolate. We need to start thinking about this differently. And you might say, well, what does this mean? What does this mean to you? What does it mean to the economy? What does it mean to politics? I live in the States. I'm a foreigner. Living in America, Trump's pretty scary to me. I wasn't a huge fan of Hillary either, but given the option, I probably would have gone Hillary. The problem is that Hillary was fighting with sensibility. Trump wasn't. I want to show you something now. This is the search volume for interest in Trump's hair versus his policies. Hillary kept fighting in an old, linear way. I guarantee you, if she had shaved her head into a blue Mohican and changed the color of it every time she got up on stage, people would have heard her. because you would be matching like for like. We have to adjust the way we're thinking if we don't want our political and economic systems to start going into trivialities. And I want to change tack a little bit now. I want to tell you about how you can grow your networks faster. When I first moved out to New York, this is me, Empire State Building. I'd actually climbed out a window to get that photo. I was very proud of it. I've thought, how can I use data to help me accelerate my connections? I was like, I should be able to use online to do this faster than when I moved from South Africa to Britain. So I went online and I found all the most interesting people I knew who had ever been to New York City. So this was all my social networks, and I looked at all the places they had checked in, all the events they had ever gone to, all the nightclubs, all the bars, and I put it all into a spreadsheet because I had a 3-month notice period at work. So I had nothing to do because I wasn't allowed to work, but I had to sit there for 3 months before I could take my new job. And I followed all of these places. I signed up to all the newsletters. By the time I arrived in New York 3 months later, my social calendar was full. I had more job offers than the one I had just gone out there with. And all I did was spend a couple of weeks signing up to the same things that people I respected did. I followed the same groups. I participated in them. And I just went and visited all the right places. I made more progress in 2 months in New York City than I did in 8 years in London. We need to embrace these new technologies. But they have some risks. What I was actually doing here was creating a bubble. A New York bubble of people I want to be like and trying to fit myself into it. And this can be really helpful, as you've seen. But social media is a bubble. Each little one has different sets of data. And you might think, well, that's not a bad thing. You're right, it's largely not. But because people only click on things largely that they agree with, this is a problem. Because it means our customers are stuck in bubbles. And their perceptions are. So let's take one bubble of data. What would happen if you were just stuck in one bubble? Doesn't sound like a big problem? Those of you who are only on LinkedIn but aren't on other websites? Those of you who only read one type of newspaper or visit one type of business or event? It's the equivalent of that, but in a data form. Well, we have a really good example. Microsoft Tay. Does anyone remember Microsoft's Tay? She is a chatbot that learned from Twitter. She got launched online, and she was super excited to see everyone. But she was only learning from Twitter, and she became racist within 24 hours. She was horrendous. They had to take her offline because she was only learning from one set of data. It's really important in this modern world that you have several streams coming in. But our customers get stuck in other forms of data bubbles. If you go onto Google and you put why do versus how come, you get different suggested searches. This means that people with good grammar are seeing different content to those with bad grammar. That's really important. People with good education are going to get different Google search results, more accurate to a certain culture. They will end up in an elitist bubble, and those who are outside of it will get locked out of it. And we need to be aware of this because grammar is dropping. The ability to spell is almost non-existent these days. And this is where we really need the wisdom of elders to help us skill up. Because otherwise, we're not going to be able to communicate with people outside of our bubbles. And then, of course, there's the new words. New words can be bubbles, like upcycle. Real thing. You can advertise for upcycle. It can be a whole business. Mankini? Anyone bought a mankini lately? We need to know about these new words because in the same way that grammar traps you in one bubble or another, there are also bubbles being grown everywhere, and we want to be able to get into those bubbles. So we need to keep on top of this. But if you don't, it will restrict business growth. And this means it takes two sets of people. It takes the elder generation sitting down with the younger generation saying, hey, what have you got that I don't? And there's something really exciting in the modern world, is that we don't have to be sat right next to each other. This is an event. This is a journalist from London speaking to someone at an event in San Francisco. So we don't need our workforce to be side by side anymore. That means your pool of people that you can help doesn't have to be in your geography for you to be effective. And we have things like immersive meeting spaces. Now, this is one that I tried recently. This is my avatar here. And I learned something really interesting here. And I'm not accusing you of bias, but I'm little, I'm female, and I look younger than my age on average. People don't expect me to be the specialist when I walk into a room. Most of the time they order tea off me and then I sit down and say, I've done my best with the tea, but let's have a little chat about your strategy. They get taken back. And I really noticed this when I used an immersive meeting space, because I met with the founders of this company in an immersive space. And they were like, yep, come meet us. And I remember walking into the room in real life when I flew to Vienna to see them. And they were like, oh. And I could see that they wouldn't have given me a chance in the real world because they thought I looked too young. There was a bias from the very beginning. And this bias is two ways. If you think that someone might be being biased towards you because of your age, you might want to try some of this new technology, because the thing about these immersive spaces is everyone is the same height and everyone is the same age. And it's really interesting to experiment with it, because I never thought I was the victim of bias until then. And it means that you can actually interact with people without any background. And there's something called Dismo. Dismo is a really cool piece of technology. If you've watched Minority Report, when he pulls the information from all over the show, Dismo does that. It's basically a table, but you can have one in all the offices around the world. So you can put something on a table, whether it's a game, whether it's a book, but it means that you can physically interact with people, and it makes that foreign distance a lot smaller than it ever was. And we need to keep on top of these types of technologies, because we are going to have more disparate workforces over time. And we're going to be living in a world of specialists, and they're not going to be sat next to you. And that means we need to find ways to effectively work together. The School of Life is an institution in London. It helps people with emotional intelligence. I want to show you something. This is the traffic volume for emotional intelligence. This is how many people want to know. They do lessons in how to have a conversation, how to be happy, how to be well. And they're growing schools all over the world right now. Younger generations don't know how to do this. So if someone's sitting down at a table with you and playing on their phone, it might not be that they're being rude. They might not know how to look you in the eye, because they have to go to school now to learn it. I was speaking to someone who had a business in Canary Wharf. And he said, I used to love going into that office because we'd always go out for drinks and it'd be a good jolly afterwards. He says, now when we go out, everyone just sits on their phone. And he's like, and so I just wanted to shut the office because I don't want to be around those sorts of people. I was like, they're sitting on their phone because they don't know how to talk to you, not because they're rude. Pretty frightening. Selfies. For people that don't talk, take a selfie. Selfies are becoming, there's a correlation between how many selfies you post and how unhappy you are. Legit research. You look at any study, the more selfies people post, the more unhappy they are. The more time people spend on their phones, inherently, the more unhappy they are. I mean, have you seen this around the world? There are little spots on the pavement and you go and stand in it, and someone has decided this is the best place to take a pretentious photo of yourself to make everyone think that you're not depressed, even though all the data suggests that the fact that you're doing it makes you depressed. It's completely bizarre. But we also notice other changes in young people's behavior. When I go into a store, this is me being mature or older, I go to the sweater section to get a sweater. I go to the t-shirt section to get a t-shirt. Do you know how young people shop? By outfit. They want the whole thing. It completely blows their mind if you take an 11-year-old into a store with a maybe 60 or 70-year-old, how they shop. They just can't shop together anymore. It's really bizarre. And we need to observe younger people and these habits because we can't sell to them otherwise. Think how much money is left on the table by not observing them. Charities are interesting too. You grew up in a world probably where you thought getting a house was a realistic objective. We grew up in a world, or my generation, which I believe is Generation X, I grew up in a world where that might be a possibility. When I speak to younger people now, it seems completely off the cards, and we see this in how people donate. I don't have regular places I donate to, because I don't know what the economy in the world is going to do. We're frightened of it. Now, you could let your charity go under, or you could say, hang on, this is a culture of people obsessed with taking photos of themselves, obsessed with their phones, and they get a dopamine rush every time they play with it. Why don't we have a mobile app? The instant payment options through mobile apps, so scanning a QR code, or being able to, there was a Tamagotchi game where you could have a fake hobo, a fake homeless person, it's a bit dark, and it was built by Shelter, so a big charity. And your job was to stop the homeless person dying. And I really tried. I took 3 days off work to try and keep my hobo alive because I was determined to save this person. But you know what the funny thing was? I kept donating money and it wasn't helping my hobo within the app. I guarantee you, if it had helped that hobo within the app, I would have kept spending because it was a feedback loop. It's that rush of dopamine. Shelter came so far to creating an app that was really impactful and just missed that final bit. And I met one of the guys who designed it, and we had a really good chat, and he hadn't even thought about, he was like, oh, about being able to help the actual hobo. I was like, dude, you realize how traumatized I am? Like, I would have given you a lot of money, a lot. Small thing missed by not observing the behaviors of young people. Technology's growth is only going to get faster and bigger. We are never going to know everything about it. And everything possible is going to be automated. But we call it AI because we're doing marketing and PR, but it is just an automation of pre-existing processes. But what we're going to be able to achieve with artificial intelligence is going to be extraordinary. Right now, Microsoft can find clues about cancer 6 months ahead of there being any physical symptoms, using artificial intelligence to analyze sets of data that would be too big for a human to look at. We now have tech that has the same certification as a drug. Natural Cycles is just a thermometer and app that helps you not get pregnant. I think some people might use it to get pregnant, but that's the main objective is contraception. And for the first time, a piece of technology was given certification of that of a drug. We need to make these things work because health depends on it. And then we have things like SwiftKey. SwiftKey is an amazing app that predicts what not just a sentence, but your whole paragraph. It allows us to move at a greater speed. It sold for 250 million. I met them about 10 years ago, and there were two guys in a room. They saw an opportunity for artificial intelligence and automation to make people's lives a lot easier. And we need to start thinking about how automation on a big scale could change our businesses and our social networks. And it's really easy to see what's trending. You have Google Trends. Anyone bought Bitcoin? I noticed something on the 24th of May last year. Bitcoin hit its peak. I bought some a little bit before. Do you know why? Because I was tracking popularity of Bitcoin in relation to boobs. Boobs, one of the most popular things on the internet. And so as soon as I saw it starting to correlate, I bought and sold. Boobs is a great baseline for trends. Kickstarter, I do the same with that. I look at all the emerging technology and I put the key terms into Google Trends, and I see which ones are building and which ones are going up and to the right, and then I throw things in, like football, World Cup, boobs, sex. Actually, never use sex, it's so big. Like, you just can't see the data difference. But start to look at real human things and see what's becoming more popular. It's a really quick way to keep on top of trends. These graphs behind me show the correlation between internet search volume and VC deal volume, i.e. investment. The patterns on the internet of trends aren't just about keeping you ahead of key technology so you know what to put in your business. They will tell you how to make money and where people are putting money into businesses. I mean, they almost directly correspond. Ignoring internet search data isn't just about keeping on top of the conversation topics. Ignoring internet search data will damage your business. Now, there are more than 4 billion people using the internet, and I've got a bunch of stats, but I'm going to whiz past them for time. But the dark truth is that no matter what's on the internet, it's pretty hard to find anyone or anything more interesting than your smartphone. We need to start getting people off their phones at work. I want to show you this. This is Siri, voice search. It's increasing. And I really like what was done here. If you say, who is the fairest of them all, to Siri, it will say Snow White. If you address Siri by name, Siri will tell you that you're the fairest of them all. It's subtly teaching people to do something very small. Address someone by their name. It's a manners thing. Lots of people don't know to do that because our technology doesn't require it. So all these subtleties that create this gap, this conflict, a lot of them are accidental, and Siri can only teach us so much. There was a really interesting study where they sat two people in a room, two strangers, and said how to have a conversation, sat opposite each other. You could drop a penny. Silence. Put them back to back and give them a smartphone, talked for hours. All I'm trying to illustrate here is the difference in how young people feel when they're face to face. Think of all your biggest business deals. How many of them did not have face-to-face time? That hasn't changed. Young people are going to be at a huge disadvantage if they can't get over this. I like to think of this as the era of together yet apart. Connectivity is at its highest, but actual true human interaction is at its lowest. This is a pretty scary stat. We're going to lose the ability to not just speak, but think. We can't afford that. And millennials do have something going for them. They're really good at making decisions fast. So if you put the skills of someone who knows how to communicate in person, have a real conversation with someone who's confident enough to make a fast decision in a fast-paced world, we get an amazing economy. And just to put this in a bit of context, I've talked about a lot of technology which I know would be quite intimidating. If you're not familiar with it, you're not familiar with the language. But one of the first advertisements dates back to 1704. It was in a newspaper in Boston. But the interesting thing about this was the letters that came in after it was published. People were like, what? A written advert? No one's going to ever do this. This is never going to catch on. Then a couple of years later, we have the explosion of Madison Avenue. Has anyone here ever looked at how people felt about the TV? These are some of the letters. I'll share this online later. People thought the TV was ridiculous. They were like, well, I can't see my knitting when I turn the lights off to watch the TV. That was the issue. And now we have TVs in every single room. And the phone is even more interesting. Some of the first reactions to the mobile phone is, why would you take a phone somewhere with you? We've been negative and had apprehensions about technology before. if you research that and you think back to your own feelings about previous technology that is now day to day, you'll feel very different about the technology that's coming ahead. Because I'm pretty pleased we have TV. I'm really pleased we have phones, and I'm not that adverse to advertising. It's effective. But we need the human skills. This is a screenshot of an actual employee's phone. Can anyone tell me what's unusual here? There is that. There is no phone icon. Well done. Yes. I check at interview if someone has a phone icon on their home screen. Because there's only so much we can do to close this gap. And if you do not have a phone icon on your home screen, I'm sorry, it's just too far for me to travel. We have a lot of laws that are starting to change our world now. Has anyone had to deal with the cookie law? Almost impossible to implement in the way it was written, right? And we have GDPR. But all these laws are retroactive. There is a problem that occurs, and then we deal with it later. So it's not surprising that lots of people think that their data is being misused. But we still don't have the laws for it. And the problem is, with data growing exponentially and technology, our laws being retroactive is just like shooting one bunny at a time. They're breeding way too fast, these problems. We need minds that can preempt these problems and create structures ahead of requiring a law. Because we will never make enough laws to keep up with technology. And young people do not have the perspective to be able to do this effectively. Reactive policy is irrational and it's dangerous. Look what happened to Facebook. You don't want that happening to your clients. You don't want your shares dropping because you've made a data mistake. You've made a mistake about a law that could have been preempted. And this is only one example. But you have to have the history of knowledge to be able to anticipate these things. And if you do, we have an exceptionally bright future. We can get people to use technology to take those drugs and effectively. And in the digital world, we leave a footprint wherever we go. And the footprint that we're going to leave as an entire nation will be that much better if we have mature people working with young people effectively. But we need to adapt a mentality of continuous learning. You will never be on top of anything in terms of language and the technology coming out. And we have to accept that, and that means we have to be willing to ask stupid questions. We have to be willing to look at the search volume of new technology and understand whether it's relevant. Because I believe the greatest restriction to the advancement of technology is not a mechanical one in any way, shape, or form. It is a human one. We need human skills. And if we don't get them, we run the risk of not adopting life-saving and changing technologies. Thank you very much. These are my suggested reads.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a great insight. Lexi, just before you leave the stage, I know we're running slightly, but perhaps just a couple of questions from the audience before we move on to our next bit. If anyone, no one ever wants to ask the first question, but if anyone would like to ask the second. Very quick questions to Lexi. Or have you all been stunned by that, which was really, really, really interesting? If you give your name first, sir.
It's John Greenhoff. Just back to the comment you made, Lexi, about Trump and Clinton, and Hillary being very linear, I think you said in her argument. What was the answer for Hillary? Was it to tend towards Trump? You talked about there needs to be a reset of how we think about all these things. If you were in Hillary's position, what would you do?
If I had been Hillary's comms advisor,
It's a paradox, isn't it?
I would have got Lady Gaga on her. Lady Gaga, she was always wearing stupid outfits, big hats, all that kind of thing. I would have Lady Gaga'd her because what Trump was doing was manipulating algorithms and that impulsive nature of us to share information. He was capitalizing on filter bubbles. And you can get into those bubbles by wearing a stupid hat or having a stupid hairdo. If you look at there's the hairdo bubble, then there would have been a bubble on offensive things to say. you can find she could have countered that by getting inside those things with slightly different strategies. And maybe she doesn't want to wear a stupid hat wherever she goes, but the choice was that or we have Trump as president. And I understand that's a really tough conversation to have, and I wonder if someone did have it with her. But yeah, I would have fought fire with fire on that one, and I would have given her the stupidest hairdo.
Lovely, thank you. Was there another quick question? Just at the front down there, Phil.
It's quite interesting that as a travel journalist, I'm now noticing when I go on a lot of foreign trips that the number of journalists is massively reducing and being replaced by 20-something bloggers, invariably fashion or lifestyle. And their preferred app is Instagram. So when I was in Genoa, 90% of the people on the trip were bloggers. There was a lady called 50 Shades of 50 Pairs of Shoes. She was from Hungary with about 80,000 followers on Instagram. Another girl from Dubai. Do you think that somebody with 100,000 followers on Instagram, who's a lifestyle or a food blogger, being invited to a city by the city's tourism authorities, do you think that they would make a difference by placing photos on Instagram that will encourage people to visit a city? Because I'm interested to understand how the tourism authorities are now engaging with media.
Sure. Actually, so I've worked with tourism authorities. I used to work for Estoril, where you have the racetrack. Absolutely love motorsport. And we did a lot of golf. Some of you might play golf well. I just was interested in hitting things with sticks because I'm young and we have issues. But yes, it was interesting because I worked through different periods of time in tourism marketing for different destinations. So as much as I was having fun playing around on golf carts, I was looking at how different people were communicating. And yes, I do think bloggers will have a greater impact. I do think visual communications can be more impactful because we don't read. So a friend of mine, I don't know if I can legally say it out loud, but if you come to me afterwards, I'll tell you which publication. We ran an experiment. We're trying to take traffic from Reddit and convert it into people reading more articles. And so we started monitoring how much of a page people read. How many people do you think read 50% of the article? Less than 10%. People aren't reading. It's the attention span issue that I spoke about with the fish at the beginning. So visual information allows you to absorb quite a lot of context far quicker than having to read it. So in that sense, it's effective marketing. That being said, do I think it's a good future where we don't read, where we have to tell our brand stories and market our political campaigns through headlines? That really worries me. How much of a cohesive debate on policy can you have on an Instagram photo? You just can't. But yes, it is very impactful. Measuring ROI of any digital is inherently, this is a very interesting generational gap, is that I find the younger people are, the more I can say to them, this is what we can measure now and this is what we can measure in the future. The older generations always say to me, no, I only care about the metrics of the day they put up the post or that week. Whereas sometimes I'll go into a business and I'll be like, that one photo, that one blog, that one article. In fact, I had one client who had one article in the Washington Post. They do vetting of software. This article is about 10 years old, and it drives 15 million in revenue every year. They don't need anything else. That one article, everybody reads that. And that's kind of interesting. But when the guys came to me, they wanted a full-blown marketing strategy. I was like, no, we'll just do some pay-per-click advertising and put that at the top, and then you'll make 30 million a year. You don't need a full comm strategy. But the difference was they were thinking about repeating something or measuring something in the short term. But they just hadn't realized that all their business was coming from one place. So I think the value of those bloggers won't just be now, it'll be in the future. But if they're doing very stylized images, then style changes, so they may not have the same value in the future. Whereas an article talking about all the wonderful things to do and the insights and the culture and the history will probably have more longevity. But if you're a contractor, what happens? You've got a 3-month contract and got to show some metrics. So I would probably, if I was on a 3-month contract, do the bloggers. If I was on a 6-month contract, go for real journalism.
Interesting. Lexi, thank you. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, Lexi Mills. What a great insight to start the day.